Now, it's time to work. So, it's with a great pleasure that I welcome here Dominique Méda, one of our distinguished visiting scholars of the Ciampi Institute, for this Ciampi lecture under the title, What Future for Work and for the Value of Work. Now, Dominique Méda, for those who don't know her, is a philosopher/sociologist who has really impacted the debate around work in the last 30 years. I remember I was a student in Paris in 1995 when first I saw the book by Rifkin, The End of Work, and then immediately after the book by Dominique Méda, Le travail, une valeur en voie de disparition. And I was really impressed at the time I was in Paris. Oh, I'm so happy to study in Paris, not in America. This is good stuff, and that is bad stuff. And the good stuff was Dominique's book. Dominique studied philosophy. Then she worked for. She studied at the École Normale Supérieure, our let's say big sister in France. Then she worked at the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Labor, so she has an extensive experience of policy, research and advice for policy purposes. And then she moved from philosophy to sociology, a loss for them, again for us. And she's now a professor since 2011 at Paris Dauphine in University Paris Dauphine. Now, the book of 1995, which I just mentioned, was translated also in Italian by Feltrinelli. I remember also the discussion in Italy about that book. Patrizia Nanz was the editorial advisor, who is now the president of the UI around the corner, and how impressed everybody was by the book then. That book, by the way, was also to give an example of how something by a young philosopher can have an impact on politics, on policy, on debates, and so on. Was also came. To inspire and, let's say, revitalize debates about working time. The reduction of the working week was introduced in the program of the Socialist Party in 1997. They didn't think they had a chance to win, that they won, and they actually reduced the working time, the working week to 35 hours, with a lot of benefits, by the way. Productivity went up. Life quality went up, and so on. Politically, it wasn't probably communicated well enough, because 5 years later the right won, and slowly then they managed to get back to working time increase. Apart from this topic, big important contribution, Dominique has also worked on gender equality, on the definition of wealth, on the definition of growth, on the energy transition. She's very active in public debates in France. In particular, she holds a column in Le Monde. Now, before I give the floor to Dominique for the lecture, which will last, as usual, 40-45 minutes, I also introduce the discussants, and I'm very grateful to Annalisa Tonarelli, Associate Professor at the University of Florence. Annalisa is an expert of the labor market. She has worked on a number of professions and problems in the local labor market on the issue of Fordism and post-Fordism. She's a contributor of a very fresh book, which is also very inspiring, Idee di lavoro e di ozio per la nostra civiltà. Ozio, leisure or loisir, but I prefer the Italian word. I prefer ozio to leisure for some reason. I don't know why. It sounds nice. It feels nice. And also Luigi Pellizzoni, who well, the locals obviously already know. He's professor of environmental sociology here at Scuola Normale Superiore. He's also the inspirer of an important network, politics, ontology, and ecology. And the last meeting we organized in last autumn was on the French contributions about ecology politics and ontology with Sylvain Boulle and a couple of others, Posy Gilbert and so on. So it's nice to have Dominique here, because although we work in English and we have people from everywhere in the world, we are also very much open to the French contributions. Both the founding dean and the current dean have studied in France a little bit, and well, we were founded by Napoleon, so yeah, we need to keep the relations, good relations. Thank you, Dominique.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for your invitation. I am delighted and very honored to be with you and to give this talk today. Before getting to the heart of the matter, I'd first like to apologize for my poor English and ask you not to be surprised if I make a few recommendations at the end of my presentation. I know that sociologists don't usually make recommendations. They have to analyze and are considered to be bound by the so-called axiological neutrality. I don't know if you have read a very interesting book by the French sociologist Isabelle Kalinowski. She's a scholar specializing in Max Weber, and she has translated many Weber's works, including the famous lecture in which it's claimed that Max Weber recommends that sociologists observe strict axiological neutrality. This text was translated from German into French in 1959 by Julien Freund, with a preface by Raymond Aron, under the title The Politician and the Scientist. Kalinowski shows that the French translation of this lecture completely misrepresented what Weber really meant. At this time, the American and French elites were frightened by the rise of Marxism, and this translation was a means of preventing the spread of this thought. In fact, Weber was addressing students and telling them that, on one hand, professors shouldn't impose their values on their students, but on the other hand, researchers have every right to hold conviction, write articles, and defend ideas. So I think we have the right to have convictions and to defend our ideas if they are well-founded. In the first part of my presentation, I will outline the lively debate that has existed in France for over 20 years on the value of work and how I have contributed to it. I will present some survey results that tend to answer this question too. And in the second part, I would like to focus on the issue of working conditions before turning to the future of work in the third part. First, a debate on the value of work. As I said, for over 20 years, there has been a lively debate in France on the value of work, to which I perhaps contributed with my 1995 book entitled, Guglielmo has said, Work, a Disappearing Value. In this book, translated into Italian, I wanted to show how work has become a central value in our Western societies, perhaps to the point of taking up too much space. I trace the history of the concept of work, showing that our modern category of work has not always existed, and that our modern concept of work was made up of several layers of meanings. In particular, I drew on the work of classical Greek historians and anthropologists to emphasize that in pre-capitalist and ancient societies, work didn't have all the meanings it has today. This is above all due to a different representation of the relationship between human being and nature. Before the modern era, nature was not perceived as a vast field to be transformed. In Greece, craftsmen were not citizens and were considered as creating nothing. At least that's what the philosophers wrote at the time. My thesis was that our modern concept of work dates back to the 18th century, theorized by Adam Smith as a means of creating wealth. And so he invented work as an abstract concept. Work was also perceived by Smith as synonymous with fatigue, sweat, and difficulty. That's why Marx will laugh at Smith. Smith understood nothing about work. Work is a creative activity, a positive passion, he said. In the early 19th century, a second layer of meaning was added, radically different from the first. Work became the essence of human being, the power to transform the world and human being himself. Marx wrote in the Paris manuscripts that, I quote, "If we produced like human beings, our souls would be like so many mirrors in which our souls would radiate towards each other." According to Marx, work is in itself a creative and fulfilling activity, but in fact, work is alienated and must be liberated. This means that the wage labor must be abolished. Yes, and this is the third act, the third stratum of meaning. The second half of the 19th century in Western countries saw not the abolition of wage labor, which was a despised condition, but on the contrary, its reinforcement, as sociologist Robert Castell has shown. Indeed, social protection and labor law were built on the wage relationship. Today, work is at the same time a factor of production, the essence of human being, and the underpinning support of the wage society. These three dimensions are contradictory. Whatever the case, work is considered as a value, a duty, and becomes a norm, a total social fact. In my book written in 1995, after recounting how work had become a fundamental value of our societies, I developed a critical section showing precisely how difficult it had become in our societies to liberate work, to make it fulfilling, to make it a means of showing others my singularity, my personality, as Marx put it. At the time, I was very inspired by Jürgen Habermas and André Gortz and their idea that work belongs to the instrumental rationality and that it is so impregnated by logics of production and efficiency that it can never be liberated. So I argued for a liberation from work and defended the idea that we needed to reduce the place occupied by work and by production in our individual and social lives. This was aimed, on the one hand, at increasing the place of political activities, and on the other hand, at rebalancing the differentiated participation in employment of men and women. It seems to me that it was time for women to have more and better access to employment and for men to take more responsibility for domestic and family tasks. At the end of the book, I proposed desacralizing work, disenchanting it, that is, giving it less value, and reducing working time to share it better. So I played a full part in the debate that began shortly afterwards on reducing working hours in France. And it was thanks to the debates on the value of work that I had at that time that I began to investigate and became a sociologist. I'd now like to turn directly to the European research program we devoted to the question of the relationship to work in Europe in 2006-2008 with 5 other European countries, including Italy. It was called SPRU, Social Patterns to Relation to Work. We used European and national surveys that gave us results on people's relationship with their work, and we also conducted interviews with more than 100 people in each country. Amongst the European surveys that we examined, the European Values Study, hereafter EVS, which has been regularly analyzing Europeans' relationship with their values since 1981, provides an interesting insight into the place accorded to work over time. Respondents are asked to express their opinion on the place of work in their lives, indicating whether work is very important, quite important, not very important, or not important at all. In each 5 ways, work was considered very or quite important throughout Europe, as you can see on the graph. In all the European countries analyzed, less than 20% of those surveyed said work was not very important or not important at all. In Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the statement that work is very important is less chosen than elsewhere, while in another group made up of southern countries, Greece, Spain, Italy, 2 continental countries, France and Luxembourg, and many new member states, the proportion of people declaring that work is not very important or not important at all is less than 10%, and between 60 and 75% of the population indicate that work is very important. That is true for all 5 ways of EVS. Cultural, religions, and economic explanations have been put forward to explain these differences, but no one is entirely satisfactory. The hypothesis we proposed that the higher the unemployment rate, the greater the importance attached to work seems correct. In our research, we have suggested that if some countries, notably France, attach greater importance to work than others, such as Great Britain or Denmark, which seem to have a more pragmatic relationship with work, this is without doubt linked, as French sociologist Philippe Diriban suggests, to national educational systems and the statutory dimension of work. In France, the social status is determined by the profession, reflects educational background, and ultimately the position in society. In France, people say that work is very important, whatever their status, unlike in Germany and the UK. Taking into account other dimensions of work enables us to refine this analysis. As far as the dimensions of work are concerned, 3 elements stand out. Firstly, the duty ethic, which several studies have shown to be in decline, is still very much present in Europe. Then, the instrumental dimension of work remains predominant. A very large majority of Europeans mentions earning a good living as one of the important aspects of work. Finally, the rise of the expressive dimensions of work is a reality throughout Europe. Europeans attach increasing importance to the content and interest of work, as well as to the working atmosphere. Many also believe that to develop their full potential, they need a job, even if the differences between countries are considerable. The youngest, the most highly educated, and women have higher expectations than others, characterized by a search for meaning, interest, content, work atmosphere, and the desire to carry out an activity compatible with other investments, family, friends, personal leisure. So to sum up, our results show that, contrary to what we read everywhere, the French and even the Latins are very attached to work, and that young people are even more so than older people. They are also more attached to the expressive dimension of work. All 3 age groups put earning a good living, interesting work, and a good working atmosphere at the top of the list. The expectations of young people are identical to those of older people, but expressed more frequently. However, the idea that the French no longer want to work is a recurring one. Right-wing governments have constantly accused the reduction in the legal working week to 35 hours of having reduced people's attachment to work, and many economists speak of French preference for leisure. The theme of the disappearance of the value of work and the need to rehabilitate it has become a commonplace in right-wing discourse in France and even beyond. This question became a burning issue just after the COVID. For example, in France, at the beginning of 2023, a study by a left-wing think tank, or so-called left-wing think tank, entitled An Epidemic of Laziness, was published and widely disseminated and read. Its main idea was that the French were tired, demotivated, ordering from their sofas, and that young people were at the forefront of this refusal to work. This was in line with the Great Resignation, the idea that after COVID, people didn't want to go back to work. It's a stereotype that comes up again and again. In our SPRO research program, we highlighted the stereotypes conveyed by different age groups. Older workers and often employers think young people are lazy, materialistic, and disengaged. Young people think older people are technophobic and inefficient. However, all available surveys show that young people, when questioned, claim to enjoy work even more than older people. In a large survey carried out among more than 5,000 people between April and May 2023, it has been shown that young people were more likely than older people to say that work is a source of fulfillment and pride. Part two, unbearable working condition. In reality, in the post-COVID period, there has been no real rupture with work, but merely an opportunity for people to give up jobs with poor working conditions. Studies have shown that the so-called Great Resignation was in no way a rejection of work, since people who had left a job found another, one less than 6 months later. This brings me back to one of the results of the 1999 wave of the EVS. When we used the survey, we were surprised by France's position. France was one of those countries where most people said that work is very important. But when people were asked if decrease in the importance of work in your life would be a good or a bad thing, the French were the most likely to answer in the affirmative. At first glance, it's a paradox. Why do people want a decrease in the importance of work in their lives? In my opinion, there are two explanations. On the one hand, the rise in concerns about reconciling work and family life, and on the other hand, working conditions in the broadest sense. Let's start with the question of work-life balance. In France, female activity rates have risen sharply over the last 30 years. The gap between men's and women's activity rates is not employment rate, but activity rate, has been constantly narrowing and now stands at just 8 points. Over the past 30 years, all surveys have shown a growing concern about reconciling work and family, which is becoming increasingly difficult when both members of the couple are working. In France, in 2020, 59% of men and 63% of women said they found it is difficult to reconcile work and family life. The other reason concerns working condition. There is no refusal of work, but a refusal of poor working conditions. I'd like to illustrate this with 3 series of surveys. The first is the one carried out by Ministry of Labor since 1978, the Working Conditions Survey, which today covers 25,000 working people. It has shown that working conditions in France have deteriorated since the late 80s due to the intensification of work. After a pause between 1998 and 2005, this intensification has resumed, particularly affecting workers in the civil service and the hospital sector. In 2023, according to a study published by the Ministry of Labour, in the midst of demonstration against pension reform, 37% of working people said they would not be able to stay in the same job until retirement. Almost as many managers said this as blue-collar employees. The second survey was carried out in 2015 by a team set up by colleagues, including Michel Viviorca and me, to work on recognition. It enabled us to interview around 200 people in some 20 companies. We highlighted the existence of a high level of contempt for workers in some companies and set up an analysis grid to show the explanatory dimensions of ill-being at work. We found French management to be highly responsible, based on diplomas and incapable of understanding the reality of the workplace. Finally, the European Working Conditions Survey has been tracking changes in working conditions since 1991. We analyzed the latest wave of the survey, 2021, with the head of the Working Condition Department, Agnès Parent-Thirion, and the results confirmed the good position of Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands, the mediocre position of the EU 27, and the very poor position of France as the bottom of the pack. France is particularly lagging behind regarding physical constraints at work. On 4 items particularly representative of high physical constraints, it does systematically, France is in orange, Germany in violet, Denmark in green, Pays-Bas in blue dark, and EU 27 light blue. France does systematically worse than its German, Danish, and Dutch neighbors, but also than the EU 27. In addition to physical stress, we now have to cope with particularly high emotional stress and increased discrimination, especially for women. The arduousness of work is reinforced by the characteristics of the job. The French work more than the others to very strict and very short deadlines. Half of French workers believe that work is a threat to their health. While belonging to a work group and the support provided by the team are decisive factors in supporting one's work, the support provided to French workers by their colleagues appears particularly weak. Even worse, French workers have little influence over their work and the decisions that affect it. They are very rarely consulted before work objectives are set and can rarely influence decisions important for their work. Based on the European Survey on Working Conditions, Agnès Parent-Thirion and her colleagues had already highlighted the greater presence in Nordic countries of so-called learning work organizations, characterized by greater autonomy at work, greater worker participation in decisions concerning their work, and greater well-being at work. In their search for the key variables explaining this situation, they found only one: a strong trade union participation. Finally, and this result also confirms earlier surveys, the French are among the least likely to consider that their efforts and work are recognized at their fair value. The gap with our neighbors is very wide, as you can see on the graph. So when it comes to jobs quality, the French are particularly badly placed. Nearly 40% of employees consider their job situation to be strained. Part 3, what scenarios for the future of work? How can we solve this both crisis, lack of jobs and lack of meaningfulness at work? I have chosen to present 3 scenarios for the future of work. In fact, 3 main scenarios seems to emerge from the available literature, and I want to examine their ability to meet the expectations placed on work. My question is very simple. Which scenario is capable of creating jobs and improving work? The first scenario, already widely implemented, is to continue the current policy of dismantling labor law. At the end of the 80s, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, promoted policies to dismantle the rules governing labor relations because they would slow down companies engaged in globalization and make them less competitive. The OECD and mainstream economists argued that only flexible wages and protection would enable Western companies to adapt to the new condition of international competition. In the UK and Germany in the late 90s and early 2000s, then in Italy and Spain, labor markets reforms were introduced to facilitate layoffs. In France, several labor law reforms have been implemented since 2015, particularly in 2016 under a left-wing government, and in 2017 under the first government appointed by Emmanuel Macron. But the reforms that have facilitated redundancies and decentralized negotiation to company level have had a negative impact, resulting in a weakening of social dialogue, as several research studies have shown. There is a serious risk that these reforms will contribute to worsening working conditions and thus lead to a race to the bottom, in addition to their poor results in terms of employment, highlighted by the ILO Research Department studies in 2015. According to this study, which covered 120 countries, deregulation of employment contracts systematically leads to a fall in the employment rate and a rise in the unemployment rate. So this first scenario doesn't look good for either employment or work. I call the second scenario the technological revolution. At a time when Europeans' expectations of work are huge, forward-looking studies regularly predict a scarcity of jobs and a change in the nature of work due to the development of a new era of automation. While the results of these studies must be treated with the utmost caution, a number of changes underway in several sectors are helping to transform working conditions. Since the early 2010s, the argument that automation will lead to the elimination of a considerable proportion of existing jobs and revolutionize work has progressed enormously and has now gained the status of evidence. Work published in 2013 by 2 Oxford University researchers had painted a very accurate picture of the consequences of this transformation of employment. In the future of employment, how susceptible are jobs to computerization? Frey and Osborne studied more than 600 occupations and estimated the likelihood of them being replaced by intelligent machines. According to the study, certain sectors, such as education and healthcare, are unlikely to be automated, On the other hand, jobs in sales, administration, agriculture, and even transport are very much at risk. For the USA, the authors estimated that 47% of the working population were in sectors at high risk of unemployment, and that their jobs could be replaced by robots or intelligent machines within 10 to 20 years. Also, Frey and Osborne's study has been widely criticized, and its predictions by no means realized. The release of ChatGPT has rekindled fears for employment. The development of the digital economy has already begun to change the way people work. In recent years, major studies have highlighted the distressing effects of this new organization on work. The disintermediation organized by digital platforms not only leads to destabilizing a large number of regulated or organized professions, but also and above all to the creation of jobs that blurs the boundaries between employment relationship and self-employed activity and leads to an increase in the false self-employment. Digital labor platforms help to break down work into individualized services and fragmented tasks, accentuating the explosion of work groups and the individualizations of working relationships, while making them more precarious. We have described a process of Tascheronization of work, accelerating companies' tendency to outsource and fragment work. In a way, it's a return to the tâcheronnage, the sweating system of the 19th century. Available research points to stricter control and monitoring of work, constant evaluation, including by the customer, and a lack of leeway over how work is carried out, all made possible by algorithmic management. Non-compliance with national labor legislation is facilitated by the transnational nature of platforms and the difficulty of controlling organizations where all relationships are mediated by information technology. We have developed a major research program on platform work in recent years with my colleagues. In particular, we have studied how labor and social security inspectors are trying to unmask the fraud of platforms, abusing false self-employment status, and avoiding social and fiscal obligation. It's David's battle against Goliath. Recently, a European directive aimed to tackle this problem and to improve the working condition of persons performing platform work was approved by member states of the Union, despite opposition of France. We now need to monitor how the directive is translated into national law. Finally, this automated, dematerialized vision of production seems to be in total contradiction with the fact that global material consumption has never been so high. And this is the third and most decisive limitation of this scenario, the radical failure to take into account the increase in quantities consumed and in the cost of raw materials and energy that we are likely to face in the near future. More generally, this scenario ignores the inevitable ecological reconversion recommended by the scientific studies, highlighting the scale of the ecological threat, particularly climatic, that hangs over our societies. Even more generally, this scenario totally overlooks the limits to growth. The third scenario that I called ecological reconversion, therefore, consists in taking seriously the series of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. It highlights the absolute necessity of committing our societies to a radical bifurcation. The IPCC reports published in 2021 and 2022 are perfectly clear on this point. They confirm that an increase in temperature of more than 1.5 degrees Celsius risks triggering non-linear and unpredictable chain effects, which could make life on Earth excessively difficult for large sections of the population. I use the expression ecological reconversion, which means simultaneously conversion and reconversion. Unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about conversion. That is the need to change our thought, our representation about the relationships between human beings and nature, our values, our indicators. In short, we need to overcome the human-nature dualism, reintegrate humans into nature, re-enchant nature, and put a stop to growth and production. The second meaning is reconversion, that is the restructuring of our economies. If humanity were reasonable, it should have no choice but to adopt this scenario. And the good news is that it can also create jobs and meet the huge expectations placed on the work. According to available international, European, and national studies, ecological transition, which consists in closing down or reducing certain greenhouse gas emitting sectors and developing others, should lead to a positive balance of jobs in 2030 and 2050. In fact, the economic activities to be developed, building insulation, renewable energies, public transport, infrastructure, organic farming, and so on, are more labor intensive than those to be phased out. However, ecological transition will be an extremely delicate operation, requiring the implementation of powerful security mechanisms to prevent the exclusion from the labor market of a large part of the workforce employed in the sectors that emit the most greenhouse gases. The idea of just transition put forward by the trade unions aims to defend the idea that ecological reconversion must be carried out in a civilized manner, anticipating developments, mutualizing losses and gains, and developing genuine solidarity between all citizens concerned, so that the costs of transition are shared by all. But European countries were unable to anticipate or properly support the restructuring of the textile and steel sectors or the restructuring of the 90s. Workers in these sectors were put on early retirement or made redundant. We know that this has swelled the vote for extreme parties. And for the moment, European countries are not moving in the right direction. The idea of planning is no longer fashionable, and the money needed to make the investments is not available in our countries, which are in debt and once again constrained by European budgetary rules. For the moment, job changes are left to the market and employment agencies. This is likely to lead to very strong resistance to the ecological transition among the population as we saw in France with the Yellow Jackets movement in 2018, or more recently with the farmers' protests. The only solution is to anticipate job changes, organize transfers from sectors that will be downsized to new sectors, map skills and support retraining. Ecologists often think that a reduction in working hours is the best way to initiate this conversion. Having strongly supported the reduction in working hours, I now believe that the ecological transition will require more human labor because we will have to rely less on machines that consume energy and generate greenhouse gases. We are going to need more human labor, and we are going to have to spread it out over more people. This process could enable us to disintensify work and therefore to get out of the crisis of work, the strong malaise at work that exists in France in particular, as I have shown. If we are to succeed in this process, we need to involve workers and get them to participate in it. That's why we need a profound change in the way companies are governed. Certain types of work organization are associated with greater well-being at work. These are the high involvement working organization, which as we saw above, are characterized by greater employee participation in decision-making and greater autonomy at work. The spread of such a model, currently more widespread in the Nordic countries, where unionism rates are high, would be likely to encourage an evolution of our production models towards a caring paradigm, no doubt also supported by the adoption of more democratic modes of corporate governance. In manifesto work, democratize, decommodify, decarbonize, translated into Italian, forward by Maurizio Landini and strongly supported by our Italian colleagues, Isabel Ferreras, Julie Battilana, and I defend the thesis that the companies need to adopt bicameralism or co-determination. The reduction of the imbalance of power between workers' representatives and shareholders' representatives could do justice both to workers' expectation and to the profound nature of the company, which is not the property of shareholders. We maintain that this type of organization should be better than the current one at transforming production and production methods. Indeed, even if workers want to defend their jobs, we can assume that they will not want to destroy the places where they live, and that they will therefore be keen to help influence production choices and invent new production methods. We have launched a global conversation on this issue through the Democratizing Work Virtual Forum, and our manifesto is now being translated into a large number of countries. We believe that the ecological reconversion of our economies must go hand in hand with a profound reform of government and corporate organization. This third scenario is by far the most reasonable. In fact, it is the one that is most capable of creating a lot of jobs and restoring meaning to work, and ultimately support the idea that work is a value. That's not to say that the work will be easy or completely expressive. It will be without any doubt be more manual and more difficult. But it will, without any doubt, be more meaningful because instead of enriching toxic companies, it will repair our world and produce goods and services that working people need. It will also, without any doubt, avoid wasting human time currently occupied in producing profoundly useless goods and services. Of course, the question remains of how these decisions are made. In the manifesto, we propose that the management of the company should be elected by the two chambers of workers and shareholders, and that these chambers should have a right of veto over the decision of the other. In this way, democracy will enter the company, without any doubt reinforcing political democracy at the corporate level. Co-determination, therefore, appears to be one of the essential elements of the ecological transition and in resolving the democratic crisis. But such a reform, which may seem utopian, requires a number of conditions to be met. The difficulty of bringing the directive on European work councils to a successful conclusion is proof that the road ahead will be a long one. The forthcoming European election will be decisive on this and other issues. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to Dominique Méda for this overview and the scenarios about the future. Let me just say one thing as a piece of information, especially for our researcher and doctoral students. As a visiting Ciampi scholar, Dominique Méda is with us for the whole month of May. Please feel free to get in touch with her. She's very, very available. And given that she mentioned also this issue of corporate company governance, she even mentioned Landini, we'll have a meeting, we're organizing a meeting for the 30th of May with trade union researchers of the CJL, who conducted a large survey about work in Italy. So on that day, there will be an opportunity to discuss a bit, to bridge the knowledge with the practice, let's say. Now, we have two discussants. I would like to ask Luigi Pellizzoni to go first, please.
Hey, thank you, Guglielmo, and thank you very much, Dominique, for this very inspiring and rich presentation. I think it is not incorrect to say that you organize your argument basically in three moments or parts. So the first one was about the value of work. And in that sense, the historical reconstruction is very important for a reason. The second part is about, let's say, the deterioration of work. And the third part is about the future of work. An oversimplification, but for the sake of brevity. So about the value of work, I say that the historical reconstruction is important because it draws attention to the fact that the notion of work that we are using is not to be taken for granted, but needs to be problematized and discussed as a possible obstacle to overcoming some problems of work that we are encountering. Now, what you said basically is that there is in the notion of work, as you say very appropriately, a total social fact, so mentioned in Durkheim, there is an element that is a kind of moral economy, in the sense that work is the type of activity of humans that is able to provide good things, to improve reality, improve life. So there is a basic worthiness in what work does. The second element is the element of recognition. So in modern society, other indicators of status or position in society disappear. So my job is to some extent a way of positioning myself in the social stratification. And the third element is the self-fulfillment. So I realize myself by means of working. Now, in each of this triplet, that there are some ambivalences that, in my view, are always present in all discussion, never totally resolved. So I would like to know what you think about that, which is, we were also present in Gortz and in the early thinkers about the problem of work. So what does it mean that work represents a problem? Is it the problem that work is alienated? This was the basic Marxist count. Is it that the work is we have to overcome necessitated work. So the problem is not so much alienation, but the fact that beyond alienation, still work can be also unpleasant. And so we may need to find a way, technological ways, to make bad jobs from machines. And so it remains unclear the relationship between liberation of work, liberation from work. Also within your presentation, you started with your original position of the 19th, liberation from work, but on the last part you are basically saying both regarding deterioration and the future of work, we are to some extent say we need to liberate work, not from work. So this kind of shifting back and forth between these meanings is an important point. To my understanding and knowledge, it has never been properly resolved or addressed. Every time there is a kind of oscillation. In connection with that, then we have the problem of deterioration of work, in the sense that what you say is that beginning, to some extent, it looked like for several decades after the second part of the 20th century that the condition of work were improving. But from some point onwards, they start to deteriorate. This largely coincides with the post-Fordist reorganization of capitalism and the neoliberal rule. So many manifestations of problems with work, including the great resignation and others, are apparently have more to do with deterioration of work than with work as such. So it's a problem of the condition of work rather than the notion of work as such. Then this represents an additional problem for the program of changing the situation in the sense that if I want to improve the work condition, I enter into some troubles that you also mentioned in your speech and presentation. One is that there are many jobs that the ecological transition will be overcoming, dirty jobs, that people working there then don't simply need to be relocated in some other job, but they, out of sociological inquiry, they defend the jobs out of a sense of pride, and a sense of pride that is related not simply to the fact that whatever job I do, to some extent I identify with it, even the most awful one, since it takes so much of my energy, of my time, whatever. But also the sense that these kind of sectors, oil, extraction, whatever, they still fulfill a very important social function. So we still draw a lot of things from that. So can society survive just by the internet, whatever? No. We still need material things to be done, material things to be extracted, whatever. So the defense of dirty jobs has some, let's say, meaning and purchase. And the idea of losing this kind of job and relocating people and generally speaking, as you suggest, turning to more labor-intensive jobs, enters into a problem of what kind of political support this may have. Because on one side, there can be this kind of resistance. On the other side, you have automatization. On the other side, the leading forces that are orienting this transformation are still those that created the problem, that they are responsible for the deterioration of work. And I am particularly in mind this kind of boundary organizations like the OECD, because I'm not particularly fond of the OECD or similar, I have to confess, but for a very basic reason. So they they continuously continue to play a double function, partly scientific and partly political. It's a dirty business, in the sense that any time they complain with the situation, seeming that they only sustain the opposite. But if you reconstruct historically, they all the time sustain those kind of changes that created the problems, and then they recognize the problems as if they were already saying that they were a problem, but it's totally false. So the historical reconstruction is absolutely important to start to question this kind of organization that, to me, create more obstacles they solve. So these are the types of problems. So first of all, we have to overcome kind of brainwashing, and I would say also value washing. I come to the last part of my commentary. So the future of work. You presented 3 scenarios. It is quite clear that the first and the second one are not the ideal ones for evident reasons, so to say. So there is the third one, ecological reconversion. And then you distinguish between reconversion and conversion. I will come to that. One problem with ecological reconversion is that, as I said, the increase in labor-intensive jobs may find problems coming from different quarters, so to say, not necessarily from corporations, but also from the labor side. Also, it is not so clear as self-evident to me that you can combine, let's say, saving work and saving the environment or saving the planet. Not necessarily so clear unless you enter into what you call a proper conversion. So I don't think what is to be discussed, and I would like to know what you think about that, is the kind of a relationship that you can establish between, let's say, reconversion and conversion. Does reconversion come first and then the conversion will come, or have to occur at the same time? So what is the relationship between the two things? Because conversion means that you have to go back to the first point of your speech, so the original definition of what work is, what kind of a relationship with the reality and yourself the notion of work entails. And by the way, there are very interesting also studies, quite recent, you may be familiar with those who focus on the relationship between the way in which the notion of work emerged in the period that you say in the 19th century, basically, and the way in which the notion of energy developed. Because those people who worked on the thermodynamic theory, they were working for the factory, for the building of the modern factory, so for the machines. So even Marx used a notion of work that was heavily affected, so to say, abstract labor, for example. So a kind of notion that you can move back and forth as an abstract thing that you can transform into any sort of thing, precisely as the notion of energy was elaborated. So also this historical reconstruction is very important. But to what purpose? To ask ourselves if and to what extent the very notion of work can be overcome. And when you suggest going back to more manual sort of work, or as in the manifesto, you say that the connection between democratization, the commodification, and decarbonization, all these things seems, in my eyes at least, to hint to a very profound transformation that ideally should occur at once. So my question is where to start from, considering that the end result should not be anything else than a conversion of the notion of subjectivity, what we are and what we do with ourselves and the reality. But if can be let's say the benchmark in the long run, what is unclear or at least very difficult to conceive is where to start from which point, what kind of reconversion, whether democratization or decommodification, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luigi. And our second discussant is Annalisa Tonarelli. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I would like to express my gratitude to Dominique for her presentation, and also to the organizer of the lecture to invite me as a discussant. I would like to start by returning to the first part of your lecture, where you challenged the idea that value of work is disappearing. The data you presented reveal that in reality, in most European countries, including France and Italy, work continues to be very important. You emphasize also the generational dimension in attempt to dismantle the stereotype, particularly strong in Italy as well, that this so-called loss in value of work is particularly strong among young people considered lazy and unwilling to engage in the work sphere. As far as Italy is concerned, we can all remember stigmatizing simplification such as Ciusi and Babboccioni, attributed by members of previous government to young Italians apparently disinterested in joint labor market. It is worth remember. I don't know the translation of Babboccioni.
They only exist in Italy.
Child.
Big babies. Big kids.
Okay.
Yeah. Huh? In German? Okay.
It is worth remembering that this is not something new. I remember that I have read that in 70s, a rhetoric had already emerged that emphasized a loss of centrality of the importance of work for a younger generation. At the same time, it is a constant element that emerged from a survey taken among a different generation of workers within the same company, that older workers tend to accuse younger ones to having a widespread disaffection with their work. I have found this attitude in such a different field of research, like steel farms, between judges, lawyers. So I think it's quite a constant. In contrast, the data you presented allow us to break the stereotype down by emphasizing how the value attributed to work remain high regardless of generation. Young people tend to appreciate the work they do in a way very similar to older workers, and the same attitude is shared among genders. However, I would like to discuss with you more in depth this point. According to EVS data that you also present, this also happened in Italy, where the value of work is among the highest in Europe for both men and women. This is an apparent paradox if we consider the low rate of female participation in labor markets. Why do women preempt an experience to which they themselves have attributed such a great significance? Some reasons are well known and refer to our welfare model, which provide low and expensive services to children and earlier, conciliation policy, and the still unequal division of care work within the family. On the other hand, EVS data reveals that for Italian women, working determine more than elsewhere a tension in value, since the belief is still strongly rooted in both men and women that family life, and especially children, suffer if a woman works full-time. In face of this tension, many women are opting out. Things are different, for example, in Spain, where since the 1990s, the increased participation of women in labor market has gone hand in hand with a drastic modernization in terms of value. Certainly, research, which is still quite scarce compared by a problem such as female inactivity in our country, has shown this is not only a reason why the value are not only the reason why women continue to stay at home. Persistent discrimination in labor market and workplaces combined with poor working condition, especially in the service sector, where a higher percentage of women is employed, make reconciliation difficult, and this is a major factor contributing to women leaving the labor market. This is allow me to return to a crucial point you have touched. If the value attributed to work remains so high, how then do we explain the apparent paradox of great resignation which gained traction after the pandemic? You invite to read this phenomenon carefully, reminding us that that in reality it is often about a shift that workers make within the labor market in search of slightly higher salary, great proximity to home, less inconvenient hours, or more relaxed work environment, a better career perspective, a less strenuous job, the possibility to acquiring or asserting a qualification, but especially, as you also strongly remind us, of being recognized. Data that emerge from a research that has tried to empirically deepen the phenomenon of the Great Resignation have shown that it is greater than general flight from work. I am thinking of the recent book published by the researcher Francesca Cohen, but on a smaller scale, I also have in mind what is emerging from a research that in my department we are conducting with the Florence Chamber of Labor through a survey that has allowed us to collect 2,800 questionnaires and 51 histoire de vie with workers who have resigned between 2019 and 2023. This survey clearly shows that that is being called into question with resignation is not so much the value of work, quite the contrary. Expectation and motivation remain strong both among all the gender and age group. The conditions under which work is done emerge as the main reason of resignation, because they make it impossible to achieve the self-fulfillment through work to which so many still seems to aspire. You said it best, under the Great Resignation there is not a refusal to work, but a refusal to working in such poor condition. More in general, from the way you articulated your speech, it seemed to me that an important indication for the research agenda of all those who study work can be deducted. To return to attributing great importance to working condition without forgetting the dimension of value. You show us how effective this approach can be on explaining apparent paradox. One such example is, of course, a Great Resignation, and another concerns the fact that a large proportion of the French said that work is very important, but at the same time, they would like to work less, or that work had less importance in their life. Conversely, it seems to me that this approach may also prove useful for other phenomena explored by researchers who have dealt with the world of dirty workers. I have in mind a beautiful monographic issue of Work, Employment and Society dedicated to this topic. There, the researchers outline AI job satisfaction within the context characterized by very poor working conditions. In this case, it is the high value attributed to work that downplay the importance attached to the work condition. Of course, we cannot but wonder whether in this specific case, part of explanation is also to be sought in the extreme need for employment on the part of people employed in this sector, who are often women, frequently of advanced age and with family responsibility, immigrants who have had unstable career before arriving at more secure employment. And here I come to an issue that I would like to raise as a topic of debate. You rightly place the emphasis on the value dimension and that of working condition, but also in light of the great attention that sociology has given to the issue of employment condition for several decades, we cannot help but think about the weight that the relationship to employment has with respect to the value attributed to work. If I were to consider the form of self-exploitation of creative workers who are willing to accept extremely precarious employment relationship in order to do what they love, or the hyper-flexible path that characterizes some low-skilled sector such as tourism or food and beverage, I find myself wondering whether the type of employment does not have a bearing on the value that people attribute to the work they do. So work is important, but which is the place of employment relation? How can, for instance, workers with different contract or different status who perform the same task in the same company attribute the same value to the work? Coming to the last part of your speech, in which three possible scenarios for the future of work are outlined, it seems to me that many things have already been said by Luigi Pellizzoni. And of course, the third scenario is the most promising, and it can create jobs, restore meaning to work, and address environmental challenges. But I think of Italian case, for example, the way in which opportunities such as the bonus for energy requalification of building have been used and the weak effect of it has had in creating quality work opportunity, a question arises. How can policy that discourage opportunistic behavior and contribute to the ecological reconversion and generate a return to generate a full employment be implemented? Just a word for conclude my intervention. I really thanking you for the richness of your intervention, of course, but above all for taking the liberty of providing us with recommendations. I personally agree with the interpretation that, in line with French sociological tradition, you give us on Weber's concept of axiological neutrality. I firmly believe that a researcher's idea, especially if, as in this case, they are theoretically so grounded and empirically supported, have a duty to become recommendations. The problem lies with those who should adopt them in order to implement policy that can make a difference to the future of work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annalisa. So we start from some answer from Dominique about this, because there have been very rich discussion. In the meanwhile, if people both from home and here want to raise their hands, I will take note, and we'll have some opportunity for questions from the floor.
Thank you both very much for your fascinating question and comments. To return to Luigi's question, 3 points. In France, there is now a big debate on the question of liberating work or freeing ourselves from work. I exchanged about this question for more than 30 years with colleagues, and particularly, I don't know if you know him, Professor Supio, yes, who translated Bruno Trentin. And Bruno Trentin has had a profound influence in the French debate, because Trentin says all your left-wing thinkers and political makers forgot working conditions. They forgot work, and it's not a good thing. And a few scholars believe that we forgot working condition, particularly when we argued for a reduction in working hours. And it's not impossible that the reduction in working time has led to an intensification of work. It's not clear, but no doubt more conditions should have been attached to this law. This law was to be according not so much attention. They paid not attention enough to the question of the reduction and the intensification of work. Second point, yes, there are two challenges. We have to organize a fair transition. That is, we need to set up a sort of public service to accompany people who have to leave some sectors to go in other sectors. And I think that we need to pay a lot of attention to this transition, because we can do a lot, make a lot of mistake, and we can lead to a refusal of ecological transition if we don't pay attention to this transition. And at the same time, we need to pay attention to the quality of the new jobs, because it is clear that the new jobs will be difficult, more manual, without machine, and so on. So we have a double challenge. On the question of values, you're totally right. I think that we need to begin with a conversion of our mind, our mentalities, our values. My thesis is that we saw a profound change in values in the 18th century with the Mandeville fable and so on, and the attention to the increasing in production and consumption. So yes, we need to start by changing our value. We need to begin with a conversion of our mind. we need to adopt a new representation of the relationships between man, human being, and nature, like Descola, to overcome the dualism. Your question is how to do that. Maybe the depth of the ecological crisis could provoke a kind of shock, but in return, political decision can change the game. And I would like to say a few words about Mansholt. Do you know Mansholt letter? It's very, very interesting. Mansholt was vice president of the European Commission from 1958 to 1972. And then he became president of the European Commission. At this time, there were only 6 countries in Europe. And at the end of 1971, he read the first pages of the Meadows report, Limits to Growth. And he was totally shocked by what he read. And he was convinced that new measures had to be taken. And he wrote a short letter to his colleague, the president of the European Commission, an Italian, Malfatti, Franco Maria Malfatti. And in this letter, he set out a comprehensive program for ecological transition. It is very, very interesting. And he stated that only Europe is capable of implementing such a program. So only Europe is capable of that. And it includes this program, halt to growth, stop with growth, a reduction of material consumption, the development of public services, sobriety, measures to protect European production, aid for developing countries, measures to promote employment, and so on. It was in 1971. So I don't have time to tell you how this letter was received. It is very, very interesting. I made the foreword for this letter. Everyone criticized Mansholt, and the first was the General Secretary of the French Communist Party, Georges Marchais. Then all the other parties, and the future Nobel Prize winner in economics, William Nordhaus, say that not only Mansholt's letter, but the report from Meadows was nothing. So we lost 50 years. We have just republished this letter in France. And so maybe we need a new Mansholt to change things. And now, to answer Annalisa Tonarelli's question, I would like to highlight several points. Yes, there is a close relationship between employment condition and the relationship with work. Just for information, France is one of the European countries with the highest number of short-term contracts. Around 5% of the employees have precarious jobs. It's one of the most rate. What is a short-term contract? Is a contract lasting less than three months. So the feeling of job insecurity is high, due both to unemployment, which remains high, and because the number of short-term contracts. And an important part of the trajectories is characterized by a great deal of uncertainty. As you say, the opposite can also be true. Some people say they prefer to do meaningful work, even if it's badly paid or with poor working conditions. Colleagues of mine have recently published a fascinating study on the meaning of work. First, they give a kind of definition of what is meaning of work. For them, meaningful work is work that is socially useful, ethically coherent, and that enables us to transform the world. And they show that the professions that most claim to have meaningful work are nursery assistants and nurses, and more generally, professions that look after others and often have difficult working conditions. And thank you very much for your comments on the female employment rate in France and Italy. It's true that the French rate is, the Italian rate is lower than the French rate, but the French rate is lower than the Swedish, Danish, Dutch, or German rates. And I would like to say that participation in the labor market is very important for women, as you said. It's the key for freedom for women, and it's important for them and for the country where they live, that they work. In France, there were great improvements in France at the end of the 90s, thanks to the influence of the European Union. Okay, perhaps we have less time, so I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dominique, again. And questions? Well, we'll start from Mario Pianta.
Thank you very much, Dominique, and the discussant. Is excellent to have you here and to engage with this combination of levels of discussion. Philosophical view of what work is, individual attitudes, and the social organization on the one hand of the economic activities, on the other hand of the ecological impact of this. I think here we have 2 points that I want to make. One is that a lot of what we have to discuss don't really address the nature of work in general, but address the nature of employment, which is created, actually existing employment in our societies. And in this sense, there is a sort of effort by people like you to understand the attitudes towards work, which, however, has been changing from the Fordist model of factory work, then the destruction of this, then the emergence of Fordism, then the emergence of precarization. So we are constantly trying to write down the same question, the question by Marx and by in context which is really continually shifting, and where basically society and the individual have to adjust in very difficult ways in some cases. So in this sense, the possibility for the current generation of young precarious workers to have the same trajectory of emancipation and social growth and personal satisfaction that their grandfathers and grandmothers had is completely different in this sense. And also from the structural viewpoint, I talk as an economist here, now we are having, after the pandemic, 1 million firms in manufacturing died, 2 million firms in cheap services, including bars, cafes, and tourism activities were created, where the opportunity for employment are half the wage of the others, precarity is the rule, and so we are talking about worlds which are completely different in this sense. And when we talk about both the subjective attitudes, but also the policies and the challenges for ecological conversion, the story is completely different. If we talk about a potential for alternative jobs or alternative employment arrangements in highly organized, capital-intensive firms with high knowledge, or in very small subcontracting firms at the end of global value chains, or in poor services, or human services, and so on. So we have probably to differentiate a little bit more the different areas and the types of initiatives that may be carried out there. And then there is the issue of agency, in the sense that for a long time, in the time of Fordist mass production and mass unionization and strong trade unionism with the Trentin people like him, the question of liberating work or recovering some degree of control over work was set in the context of collective identities of mass organized labor. Now, who is the collective actor that in the ecological context we still miss the emergence of a social movement or a collective organization which can speak with us rather than I in facing decision and having some institutional power. So when we frame the issue of the future of what we do and for work and what is produced and how it is produced and what is the impact on the future of the planet, we still miss a subject who has the collective authority to speak in this sense. And the political process, of course, is much weaker vis-à-vis the power of capital. Finally, on top of this, we just had last week an intense week of teaching in a summer school about innovation, technological change, digitalization, artificial intelligence, and the impact on labor. And clearly, all the debate from the economist side is completely forgetful of the questions that we are discussing here, and we just take for granted that there is a machine, the logic of capital introducing artificial intelligence or digitally driven new task, which is almost unstoppable in this sense. So the question of how all these issues become issues of contention, issues of struggles, issue of political debate becomes very relevant, also because of the massive imbalance. When you propose co-determination, co-determination implies a highly balanced, organized, structured arrangement. When ChatGPT throws in the market its system, which in 1 week gets 1 million users all over the world, our work, including our academic work, is going to be changed probably forever, and we have no say at all in what are the rules of the games. But that's a nice story. Sorry. Thank you very much again.
A question here from Angela Moro.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to join the discussants and Professor Pianta in thanking you for your very inspiring lecture. I had 3 points, actually, try to be very brief. First one, you mentioned that in your previous work, you highlighted the role of the educational system in shaping people's relationship with work and employment. I was wondering how it worked in the French case, given an educational system which is on one side very democratized somehow, so with this policy of bringing 80% of young people course to the high school degree, the 80% au bac, and on the other side a university system which is closing right now and which is very polarized between elite and mass universities. So that was the first point. And this 2 other points concern, of course, the issue we are all discussing, so your first scenario that you described in the end. I had two issues that I wanted to discuss. The first one was that you mentioned that new green jobs in green sectors. You mentioned that green sector will be more labor intensive than actual phased out sectors, but you also said that those jobs will be somehow less intense. So there will be a process of de-intensification of work. I wonder how the two go together, given that on one side we are assisting to a trend of increasing work intensification in the last 30 years, that firms that are investing on green, so-called green production in Europe are doing so by reorganizing their production in order to be more efficient and also in order to extract more value and also to intensify work. And given also that public institution and for European Commission in the first place are saying that there will be no green transition without digital transition, and don't want to be, let's say, deterministic, but often the implementation of digital technologies in workplaces means an intensification of work. So how the two go together. And the third one, and it will be very, very, very brief, is probably a criticism that you have often heard about what you wrote with your colleagues in the Democratizing Work Manifesto. And I wanted to know the answer. And this is in the 20th century history, at least, reforms that have democratized work and workplaces have come after huge labor mobilizations. And somehow the democratization of work is a consequence of major labor participation, major worker participation, and not the contrary. So if you think about the co-determination system in Germany, instituted right after the labor movement of the post-war Germany, but the same was true in all Western countries in the late 60s and beginning of 70s. So will a democratization of work coming somehow from above work, or you have other ideas on how to get there?
Okay, thank you very much. Mario. I am not sure that I totally agree with you. You say that things are totally different after COVID than before COVID. I am not sure. Okay, we work online. We have lost a lot of jobs. People have left some bad jobs, but is it really completely different? I am not sure. And the main thing that I would like to say is that for me, the priority is first to take seriously the threat of climate crisis. We need to react. We need to do something, because the works of the scientific just now are absolutely dreadful. We need to act, and we need to reconsider our politics and our representation of work, okay? But we need to change all. We need to change fully our politics. We need to give us new priorities. We need to change the articulation of the different sciences, the economy, the sociology, which have a very anthropocentric vision of things. For me, these sciences are no more relevant. We need to give up them. And so is the first thing. The second thing is that I think that the decision-making process at the level of the European Union is very important. I believe that we could invent some program, a plan, a politics to change the thing. Yes, we are losing jobs in Italy, in France, in all the European countries, but we need to react, and to react, we need to adopt. We need to. It's my opinion. We need to go further in the federalism of European Union. We need to build political European Union. And we need, exactly like Mansholt said, as in this letter, to adopt a very comprehensive program to organize the ecological reconversion, which is the priority. So you said there is a machine, the capitalist machine, but we need to stop this machine, because if we don't stop this machine, it's certainly the disaster. So I think that the European Union and the election on the 9th of June are very, very important. I think that the European Union could change things. Co-determination, for example, the European Trade Union Confederation is in favor of co-determination. The Commissioner of Employment, Nicolas Schmit, is in favor of co-determination. So we can organize an alliance between NGO and trade unions and policymakers to change the things. Three questions. Yes, the educational system. Yes, there was democratization in the French educational system in France, but you know that it's the worst system in all the Europe, perhaps not in the world, but in Europe for the social reproduction. It's a very unequal system, and because it's very polarized between grandes écoles, good universities, and other universities. So in France, you know that the status comes from the grande école you have made. Labor intensive. Yes, I take an example. Organic farming. Organic farming is more labor intensive than conventional agriculture. But it needs more labor. Okay, but you can have more labor in general, and simultaneously you can try to disintensify this labor. You can decrease the productivity. You can have other targets. So I believe that you can, in the same time, have more labor and disintensify labor. And about digital transition, yes, I know that the European Commission says that we need to do in the same time digital transition and ecological transition. But I believe, I think that ecological transition is more urgent than digital transition. And digital transition, from an ecological point of view, is not good, because today the greenhouse gases emission from this sector, digital sector, are the same as the aviation. So it's enormous. So for me, ecological transition is the priority, and digital transition is interesting only if it helps the ecological transition. Yes, and the question of the mobilization and social movements. You say that in the 19th century, we need social movement to improve social protection. But it's not totally true. Take the example of Germany. In 1883, it's Bismarck which invented a complete system of social protection. Why? Because he wanted to stop the increase of socialist parties, and second, because he wanted to give some grain à moudre to the workers, and third, because the thinkers, the scholars, are in favor of an intervention of states. And it's the same thing in France. In France, some authors defend the idea that it's not the social movement which allowed to make improvement in social protection, but Catholics thinker, Villermé, doctors, and so on. So perhaps maybe we can believe that today, yes, we need social movement, and we need tools, the helpness of movements.
Now we start having a bit of a contradictory position because we want to reduce working time, but so we also want to have more time. Luigi, you have a question.
Very quickly. Now, following the previous question, it's about the relationship that you think there may be between intensification of work in terms of more manual work and decarbonization, because this is exactly the opposite that the supporters of digitalization and whatever hold. So any supporter of digitalization say, okay, in this way we are able to decarbonize, save energy and whatever, because we rationalized all the processes, whatever. You are claiming the opposite, that it is possible, that this will go to an intensification, so to increase of extraction, which I also believe. But in terms of argumentation, how can you argue that an intensification of work or working of manual work, whatever, may correspond to a decarbonization, provided that this does not imply a decline in lifestyle and in general? Of course, if we go back to pre-modern society or whatever, then I can understand. But if you want to stay with this kind of level of life and do this, this enters a big trouble in terms of political argumentation vis-à-vis the digital supporters. So how can we argue?
I am not sure to have understood, but in my opinion, we need more sobriety. We need to work more slowly. We need slow down. We need less produce. I think, like Aristotle, do you remember the famous sentence of Aristotle? Life is action, no production. And it's something that we forgot. Life is action, not only production. So in 1999, I wrote a book about growth, limits to growth, and I entitled my book, What is Wealth? And I criticize the confusion between a wealthy society and the rate of GDP, as if GDP was exactly the same thing or was an equivalent of the progress.
So basically, it's an argument for degrowth, yours. Yours is an argument for degrowth.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes. I personally, I don't use the this expression degrowth, but we say with my colleagues post-growth, as you say, post-work.
Now, just two little points. Thank you very much. It has been very fascinating. But on this last two reflections, if I can, well, I can decide that I have the right to speak, even if we are reached 5 o'clock. When you mentioned the question from Angelo, when you mentioned your research on recognition at work, you mentioned exactly this point about the education system in France being one reason why managers treat employees from the top down, and workers obviously resent it. That has been a classic in labor sociology, has been noticed by Duncan Galley, it has been noticed by the societal approach by the French sociologists and so on. That is, the fact that the managers in France came from the Grande École completely detached from the life of workers, resulted in a cultural gap, which then, together with political factors, contributed to radicalism, opposition, and so on. Whereas, for instance, in Germany, the fact that both managers and workers came from vocational training meant that at least they shared the language. They were in class terms on opposite sides, but at least they shared the same culture and the same language. And this is very intriguing because we are a Grande École here. I mean, we are the closest to a Grande École there is in Italy, and we don't have many factories around here. We don't share much time with the working class, let's say, of today. And so what can be done to avoid this distance, which probably is even growing in post-40 society? If we look at Peter Hall, for instance, the more people go into university, which should be a good thing, the more populism there is. Because those who don't go to university, they feel more distant and treated worse. How can we survive? I mean, we try obviously to study these topics. I mean, this lecture is an example, to try to think and engage with these issues. Well, that is enough. I mean, even our teaching from next year, our undergraduate course, postgraduate course will be on politics, economics, and sustainability. We try to do that, but it's a big reflection. I'm not asking you for an answer also to this. You provided already a lot of recommendations, but it's a big reflection that comes from today. And the second one, which how links to that, is about the working time thing. And how to get there to the working time reduction. Because I see the Aubry laws in France of 1998 and 2000. However well-intentioned they were, however actually successful in some regards have been, as let's say, the swan song of Fordism, of Fordist regulation, le chant du cygne du Fordisme. That is, the last attempt to find one law and one solution for the whole of the labor market in one go. It's really difficult to think about in those terms now. It's not a surprise that nobody is proposing that kind of measure anywhere. It's not a surprise that in Germany, which also, there's been a very strong campaign and movement towards the 35 hours, but in a completely different way. That is, through collective bargaining. Unlike in France, the process has not stopped, and actually slowly is going ahead. They had the 35 hours by collective agreements. Now they have the 32 hours. The problem with Germany is another one, is that system is sectorial. So they have the 32 hours in some sectors where trade unions are stronger, they don't have it in other sectors. So your contribution about democracy, democratizing work and goal determination is crucial. That is how to expand the determination and collective bargaining that does work in some sectors to the other forms of work. But I do think that, think about working time, the distinction between what is working time and what is not working time. Under Fordism, it's very clear. If you think of E.P. Thompson, the industrial society is based, even before the machine, on the clock or l'horloge. The fact that you can't have a factory, in a modern factory, without the huge clock at the top of the wall, and everybody looks at that, everybody measures that time. Before the clock, you couldn't have that kind of organization. Nowadays, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, think about care work, the problem of waiting time, in care work, which is a hugely expanding area of work. Is it work when you sleep, when you're a carer, but you're asleep, but you're still on call in case the person you care for is ill or not? It's a huge labor law issue. Think about our job, online work, being online, being, they can call me at any time. Is that work? Is not work? What does it mean in terms of 35 hours? Very little. And the same about thinking that it can be exactly the same regulation for a platform, from a company, for a cooperative. It's quite difficult. And completely neglecting the work organization issue. That is, you can reduce working time, but if you intensify work to get exactly the same production, the life of workers probably is going to get worse. They will have more accidents. They will get ill. So what's the point of working less if you have more working deficit? So I do think that the democracy bit is the key one. It's not by surprise that also, for instance, Dukes and Strake in their recent work on work and democracy focus on that. And to answer, Andrew says, well, but we need a movement from below. I think that movement, it doesn't look exactly like the suffragette and, you know, and the movement for democracy in the 19th century, but there is a movement for that. I mean, the argument by Strake is that, well, if we think that all workers want the same, probably it's not true. It's not that they all want the same kind of employment contract, the same working hours and so on, but they all want to have more voice. There is quite a lot of evidence that in different ways. That doesn't mean they all join the CGIL or the CGT, but they want to be listened to. And your research and recognition shows that as well. So the fact of giving the opportunities to have democracy to people who want democracy, although they don't express it necessarily in a political form, is probably a crucial point. On these issues, on the 24th of May, we'll have another Ciampi lecture with James Galbraith on inequality, which is a side of the coin. And on the 13th of June, correct? The Ciampi lecture is on the 3rd. Yeah, the 24th of May, then the 13th of June, Kathleen Taylor, correct? Yeah, I asked our Ciampi president. The 13th of June by Kathleen Taylor on the Amazon Society, Amazon's economy. Sorry, so it's certainly something we will keep thinking. But thank you for inspiring us a lot with your lecture today. Thank you to our discussants. Thank you for the whole audience at home and here. And merci beaucoup, Dominique.